Great, thank you. So my name is Della. I'm from Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, where I'm currently in the role of an assistant professor in physics and astronomy. And I'm going to talk to you today about how I think we should be going forward with supporting the Allotrope Foundation through scientific collaborations and publications. I will review what we have done in the past and some of the plans going forward, and really want to extend an open invite to all of the foundation members and partners to join this. I'm going to test if my clicking works. It seems to do. Okay, great. So my outline is the following. I will first give you some motivation why I think it's a good idea to raise scientific awareness for the Allotrope format. Then I'm going to review some of the recent publications that my lab has supported. And then we're going to highlight some of the work that's currently in the making and that has some potential for collaborations. And at the end, I want to give a little bit of an outlook of how I think we can go forward with increasing the scientific footprint of the Allotrope format and how we can leverage academic partnerships to really lead to a broader acceptance and support of this initiative. So let us start with a short history of a standard that I think we would all agree has been very successful in being accepted. So let's do a little history on the PDF format. The key architect of this format, John Warnock, said in 1992 that when Acrobat or PDF was initially announced, the world just didn't get it. They didn't understand how important sending documents around electronically was going to be. I think that's sensible, right? In 1992, the internet was still pretty young. People just didn't have the vision. So yeah, I can understand that not everyone was fully aware of the potential, but of course today it's kind of ludicrous to think about a world without PDFs and without the ability to sending around electronic documents. But I think it's good to look back and to realize that even for some very successful technology like PDF, it was a long way to get to where they are right now. And so that's supposed to be anticipated for any emerging standard. What I think that we can do is we can learn from the history and try to make some parallels to what happens to the Allotrope data format and how we can maybe even learn from this history to make some smart decisions going forward. So one thing we should be aware of is that the PDF was not the best technology at the time that was around or was necessarily the most anticipated breakthrough ever. It was just something that was there and it solved a very, very important need. And the need it solved was the Internal Revenue Service tax return nightmare. So the IRS in the US had to send out millions, I think about 100 million different tax forms to different taxpayers, which is individual households, it's LLCs, large companies, and depending on who you were, you had to fill out different forms. They had to somehow print those and send them out. I have one short question. I hear in the background like someone typing. Maybe there's someone that should mute himself right now. I don't know if you hear that too. So what happens is that the IRS made the decision to go electronical and send out these tax forms. And that was really the first time that PDF was accepted big time, and it led to the global introduction, I would say. What I think is more important though is to focus on the second industry or the second use case where the PDF was leveraged, and that was within the National Institute of Health, or the NIH, which is one of the biggest government funding agencies in the US for academic work. And there it started to really become, so the PDF started to become this workhouse of sharing scientific information and making sure that solicitation letters were properly sent out and everything was documented right. And so that was really a big breakthrough, because up to that point, it was really hard to get access to all of the scientific publications. So without the access to a big library that you could go to, it was very hard to get a hold of what's currently being published and what is the state of the art. And so that really helped with disseminating information. And so I think those were really two great use cases that drove the adoption of PDF forward and led then in 2018 also to what I think is the pinnacle of every attempt to establish a standard, and that is ISO certification. And so what I want to do now is do a little bit of a leap and try to rewrite this history and try to rewrite this as a history of the ADF. And changing this wording slightly, we might say when Allotrope was announced in 2015, the world just didn't get it. They just didn't understand how important sharing semantic data was going to be. And now the open invite to put your name here or not, depending if you can agree with this. Because I think that sharing semantic data is really something visionary. At this point, we don't necessarily know where data science is going to take us. We don't really know what the power of machine learning is going to be in our sphere. We're all very optimistic, and we think that there's going to be a lot of potential. And by having the ability to putting data into a semantic context, we'll be more likely to leverage the full potential, but we don't know for sure yet. But I think within the Allotrope Foundation itself, we all would say like, yeah, this is something that I put my name under because that's something I'm driving forward, and we're all spending a considerable amount of our time and working hours trying to make this happen. When we think about the killer app for ADF, well, it was designed for pharma data exchange, right? So to a certain degree, we are attacking this right now. We have some ontological models, we have method databases, we had some nice talks. We're going to hear some other talks today on Wednesday. I think there are already some very good proofs of value and proofs of concept around how we are solving this data sharing nightmare. And I don't want to talk too much about it, but I think we should also learn from the second use case of the PDF, academia or NIH. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today, because I really think that within academia, we have a huge problem that Allotrope can solve. But I don't want to spill the beans right now, so we're going to get there in a bit. And maybe the big question at the end, do we want to become an ISO standard? I really hope so. I think Allotrope has the potential to do that. Does it have to be 2031? I'm not sure if it always has to take that long. But at one point, we want to reach this goal, so it would be interesting to see what people think about that. Here's a little overview of the publications that have come forth from the Allotrope Foundation and its members. I took this from the Allotrope website, so I hope it is comprehensive. We can see here in this plot that between 2010 and now, we have about 10 publications that came out. What's interesting though to notice is that between 2010 and 2017, we had about 1 publication per year on average. And then there was a publication gap for 3 years. The papers that came out in 2020, those are all papers that my lab has supported. So it seems to me as if there is this publication gap, and it sort of represents the difficulty of resources within industry to finding the time of actually reporting to academia the cool things that they have done in-house. If we look at the publications, the ones predating 2018, they were really focused a lot on trade journals. Not all of those underwent peer review. And I think based on the citation count, they had a pretty limited visibility within academia. So depending on what the goals of those publications were, they may or may not have been fully met. So I'm not going to complain about this because I myself was 2015 to 2018 within Bayer. I wrote a master's thesis about digital preservation in the Allotrope format in that time, and I didn't bring out a publication. That is because within industry, it's very hard to find the time for something that is completely optional and doesn't necessarily help the business goals or personal evaluation. So we tend to not find the time for it. But the point that I want to make with this plot is that while I believe that there's a lot of awesome stuff being done within the Allotrope Foundation, not all of it has found its way into peer-reviewed publications yet, simply because of a lack of time. And one purpose of my talk is to just say, within academia, we do have scalable models. We can onboard good students. We can write quite a few papers and help the member companies to turn good findings into peer-reviewed articles. So let's have a look at the 2 papers that came out this year. The first one I already presented on when the proof of concept was completed a year ago at the Allotrope Connect. But since then it has been published, so I thought it might be nice to just show it one more time and just point out that what we do with these publications is really increasing the understanding of what the Allotrope data format is and how it compares to other solutions that exist in different industries. So here specifically, we discussed with the Brigham Young University one of the biggest universities in the university libraries in the US, how the Allotrope data format can help them preserve their digital content. And we found that using the Allotrope format substantially improves their workflows and ensures long-term readability of data. And so what we did is, of course, in this publication, explain what the Allotrope data format is, explain the different shelves or containers of it or packages. And then in this table, we also made a systematic comparison against the Baggett format that has some similarities to Allotrope, but doesn't really fully support the FAIR data model. And so I thought that was a nice contribution to the general awareness of Allotrope. This was published in the Digital Library Perspectives, which is one of the top journals when it comes to the space of library archiving. So we'll see how much impact that will have down the road. The other paper that we had just accepted recently, it hasn't made it yet on the Allotrope webpage. It was written in response to an invite by Springer for Advances Intelligent Systems and Computing. The conference that this was sent to is going to take place beginning of next year, so I'm not quite sure when the paper itself will be published, but we do have a preprint online, so if you're interested, you can definitely go ahead and already download it and read it. What we did in this paper is we tried to understand why it is so hard for the pharmaceutical industry to do digital transformation successfully, especially in the laboratory. And in order to understand this better, we did a historical review of how the laboratory has made it from what we termed the early modern to the modern time to the postmodern time, where it's now stuck trying to make it all the way into the digital age. And what we realized is that there are four different criteria that define if a laboratory makes a successful transition throughout the ages. And we coined those insights, so the way we understand and use data to gain new knowledge and new understanding, then how we communicate our findings, and then also what boundaries we impose on a laboratory. And then finally, how do we establish trust? How do we get the rest of society to believe that the things we find are really true? Especially within pharma, where we're highly regulated, it's important to establish trust the right way. And maybe to just give an analogy that kind of indicates of how one makes it through these four ages, we can talk for a moment about fintech, which I believe is one of the successful industries of making it all the way into the digital age. And we think maybe about the example of investing into stock. And so when we think about the way insights were created throughout the different ages, we can think that in the early modern time, you would just do things by observation, which means if you want to invest in a company, you look at the company and what is the price of the stock today. And all you know is this is the name of the company, this is the stock price. And then you make an investment decision, yes or no. And you probably would agree that's a very poor investment strategy. So a lot better would be to run an analysis, which means you get a time trend. You can see how the stock developed over the last 10 years and where it currently is compared to its history. That would be the modern analysis. But then when you go even further, meta-analysis means that you're able to put into contrast not only one company, but a variety of companies. Maybe you look at the entire pharma scope and then you decide, hey, Novartis compared to the rest right now is a little bit over the market, and you make your investment decisions like that. And then, of course, today, fintech is at this place where they do advanced analytics. They run complicated machine learning models where they use time trends from all stocks available, where they use headlines and text mining from newspaper articles, interviews that the analysts do, and mix this all together to make great decisions. Well, obviously, they're still not that great because I don't think anyone has broken the consistent 51% success rate yet, or the world would have more dramatically changed. But I do think that the general tendency to going towards this advanced analytics is really what marks the digital age. And for us within pharma, this is definitely where we hope, while being in not such a stochastic but more deterministic science, we can make really great breakthroughs by getting successfully into the digital age. So I guess the key insights from this paper were that there is something that locks pharma into the postmodern age, which we think is mainly due to a bad heritage of an application-centric architecture, which is the result of a lot of silo decisions that were made over the decades, where individual labs chose what type of software they wanted to use, what type of machines they wanted to use, and just tried to get things working in their limited scope. But that never really integrated well into an enterprise strategy, and therefore created a lot of silos that were just not very interoperable. And so we think that the way forward to unlock this digital age is going to go through this transformational shift into a data-centric architecture. And in that context, we identified a few enabling technologies where Allotrope is definitely one of the leading hopes for us to enable data centricity by giving industry the chance to use a standard that can verify the data that is currently around and make it future-proof to give us all of the benefits that we hope come with the digital age. I don't want to spend too much time on it. You can definitely read it up if you have interest, or just reach out to me. Then let's talk a bit about the current project that we have. One of the questions we ask ourselves is it enough for data to be fair? And what does it really mean for data to be fair? So FAIR is the acronym that we all heard so often for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And we know that the original paper that came out like in 2016 had a very comprehensive vision, right? FAIR is a really comprehensive topic. It captures so many nuances. So I think it's a great, it's a really well-chosen acronym. It's very sticky, but then it really contains a vision that is great and will carry us for a few more years. But it does leave a certain room for interpretation, especially as it comes without the concrete guidance of how to implement it. So I think that the investigations that I'm going to talk to you about now, they can really help us gain additional insights and understanding, especially of what the INR of FAIR really mean. And so the concept we have developed, oh, actually, let's do first a thought experiment, because I think that will motivate it nicely. So let's imagine the following. You find a plane wreck, like this guy here, and you want to know what happened to this airplane. This is a picture of the one that was recently shot down over Armenia, causing some type of trouble right now between Russia and Turkey. So it is very important to know what happened to this guy. So you extract a flight recorder of this airplane. And now imagine you have a magic button you can press on it that will result in something like that. You have this nice lady pop out, and you're able to directly interrogate the data set and try to learn everything that you wanted to know. So the question is, what would you like to ask in such a situation? Well, in this case, obviously, the question is who shot you down? It's easy to ask. But within Pharma, when we get a data set, we might want to ask other questions, right? Who created you? What purpose were you made for? What does this peak mean? All these type of things we want to know from data sets. And we think the way to get there is by creating something that we coined the self-reporting data asset, which is an implementation or an extension of what the INR of FAIR really mean. And to us, it means that this data set is completely understandable by itself through the metadata it contains, by being self-documenting. It's very effective in its usage, it's long-term stable, and it's extensible. And extensible to me means it gets smarter over time as we develop more and more sophisticated ontologies that help us to put it into a greater and greater context as these models improve. And so this paper that we're setting out to write is introducing this idea of self-reporting data assets, and it tries then to assess what the best ways of representing these SRDAs. And we want to do this by an evaluation on fit for purpose based around business cases that we have encountered within Pharma. So our plan is to define these business cases and then compare how an ADF representation of an SRDA compared to JSON, AnIML, or other formats can be used to fully implement what we consider an SRDA. And so this is currently a cooperation with a biotech and with Novartis, but we're also very interested in expanding this and getting additional data sets, filled data cubes, tabular graph models, anything that you have and would like to contribute in terms of business cases or already proof points would be very interesting to include into this. So if this is something that sounds like a good fit to you and your organization, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to discuss it with you and find ways of making a collaboration work. Maybe a good question is, why do I care, right? I'm a professor in physics. I do mainly research on in silico drug discovery and protein engineering. So what is the benefit for me in driving the Allotrope Foundation format further? And I want to give you an example of this paper of ours that just came out a week or so ago, where the peer review process took about 8 months. It was a very painful process that involved convincing quite a few reviewers on the legitimacy and the correctness of our in silico methods, the way we run simulations, and how that compared to the analytical findings that came from the lab. And so I felt that it would be so much easier if I could send a data model over that peer reviewer would be able to independently assess without having any knowledge of the specific technology that I used. And that is something that's completely impossible right now. We have so many different tools for the same tasks. They have different parameter sets, very comparable to the method problem that lots of people in pharma have right now, where we don't really have a solution. So there's no method database, for example, for molecular dynamic simulations. And so it's a very painful process if you're someone that submits a paper and wants to express it correctly, or someone that's reviewing and you want to understand what the other people did. It's very painful. And I really think that a standard that helps by providing us unambiguous information would be super useful. And now the question is, why do we want to go with a standard like Allotrope and like not a non-industry standard? And I'd like to compare here shortly the AnIML format with Allotrope, which is AnIML is something that I investigated at Bayer for a while. And that is a format, if you look at the GitHub, that seems to not be very alive. There's not so many updates going on. We have like one file that was updated 8 months ago. Everything else is years ago. It just doesn't seem to be something that's alive and vibrant. If I compare that to the Allotrope consortium, where we have quarterly releases, where we have free FTE supporting it, we have the strong community, then there are all these ways to integrate with the consortium, as Matthew explained on last Wednesday. This is something that's very vibrant. And me as an academic, I wanna bet on the right horse, right? And the one on the left seems to be a bit dead to me. So I wanna make the right choice going forward. And so that leads me to the last question: how can we increase the scientific footprint? One thing my students and I realized recently is that the Allotrope Foundation has a conference of more or less the same size of most respected scientific conferences, but there has not been a single time comprehensive publication on the proceedings of this conference. And so we volunteered and I told Jamie and Matthew that if Allotrope agrees, we'll be very happy to write a review paper on the progress of the consortium, where we highlight the original business drivers, where we currently stand, and then especially emphasize the findings and presentations of this conference. Because I think that most other conferences of this scope would invite the presenters to also submit a paper for peer review. I realize that most of us here won't have the time to do that. So what we are proposing is to write one comprehensive paper that reviews the proceedings. And we're having a process in place where we're going to make sure that we're going to align with the different presenters, that we represent their presentation in the right light, and then also going to have a review process with the Allotrope board. So our current plan is that we're going to write this up throughout the month of October. In November, have the Allotrope board review this, and then hopefully end of November, beginning of December, submit it to the Journal of Information Technology, which will hopefully drive a big, broader interest into this format from academia. So going forward, we can really establish ourselves as the format and consortium that is best suited to drive standardization, not only within pharma, but even across it for really breakthrough technology. So with this, I want to leave this XKCD with you and look at potential questions that come in, because I really think that we have synergies. And if academia and business work together, we can make sure that everyone gets the credit they deserve and the world becomes better through sharing information in the right outlets. So thank you very much for your attention.